Welcome everyone! We all know Bobby Fischer's go-to defenses. He very much liked the Najdorf, King's Indian, occasionally he played the Grunfeld. But a great player can play every type of position really well. And in today's game, which is from the 1962 Interzonal in Stockholm, we see one of the rarer Queen's Gambit games by Fischer. And he made it look like the Queen's Gambit was all he ever played. Just sit back and enjoy. He played Mario Bertok, a Croatian GM, and Bertok opened with d4, d5, c4, e6, Queen's Gambit declined, knight to c3, and here bishop to e7 by Fischer, which is a clever move order, and I'll show you why. If black instead plays knight to f6 here, then white can go for this exchange variation with bishop to g5. Of course, after bishop to e7 and cd and ed5, there is no bishop g5 anymore. And the second point, going back here, not only can white go for this type of exchange variation, but white can also go for an aggressive setup after c6, e3, bishop e7, bishop to d3, and knight bd7. White can also go for knight from g to e2, and later white's going for f3 and e4. If you don't want to face that going back to the game, then bishop to e7 is also clever, because when black first rules out bishop to g5, then white may go knight to f3, and with the knight now on f3, white can never go for that f3 and e4 plan again. This was also the game continuation. It continued knight to f6, bishop to g5, and after castles and e3, Fischer put the question to the bishop. Bertok didn't trade. And with b6, Fischer is playing the so-called Tartakower variation. The main alternative is the Lasker variation with knight to e4, going for this trade, but that does have a more drawish reputation, so I can see why Fischer wouldn't go for that. So b6 instead, then c takes d5, white's planning to go rook to c1 and then put pressure on black's c-pawn, and here Fischer decided to play like this with knight takes, a bishop trade, knight takes d5 and ed5, and Fischer later said that he knew this was kinda drawish, but since he'd already won the Interzonal, he didn't mind too much. Bishop e2 was next, and then bishop to e6, which may seem odd at first since black played b6 earlier, but on b7 the bishop would only be staring at the d5 pawn, so after the pawn trade on d5 the bishop almost always ends up here. And after castles, black showed the second reason for playing b6, and that is c5. And what black is hoping for, and what also happened in the game, is that white takes on c5, because after pawn takes c5, black has these so-called hanging pawns, and even though they may seem a bit weak, they do take away a lot of space, so white is more cramped, but the pawns also have potential to break through. White always has to keep in mind that d4 or c4 can come at some point. It continued queen to a4, and here a strong move by Fischer, queen to b7, hitting the b-pawn, but that's not all this does. After white protects the pawn, and knight to d7, black is ready to take the initiative. Now the plan is a5 and queen to b4. White continued knight to e1. Already you can see the knight is lacking a good square because of black's pawns. a5, knight to d3, but the knight immediately got kicked away with c4, knight to f4, rook from f to b8, and you can see how easy Fischer's moves are. Everything he does comes with a clear purpose or with a threat. White meanwhile cannot even find good squares for his pieces, and at this point it actually got even worse. Bertok played rook from a to b1, and that's just a mistake. It would have been best to first take on e6 and then go b3, so black still wins a pawn for now, but white gets a little activity with queen to e7 attacking the knight and the pawn, so knight to f8, and after bishop to g4 and rook to a6, at least black is a little tied up defending the e-pawn. Active defense is most often the best defense. In the game, however, white went rook from a to b1, but bishop to f5 hits that rook right away, and after rook from b to d1, the knight got a better square on f6, And even though it may seem that not that much has happened yet this game, already white can collapse quite easily here. Let me briefly show how it can go wrong for white. Let's say white goes bishop to f3, so giving up the b pawn but counterattacking black's strong pawns. After the trades on b2 and then trading on d5, material is equal, but rook to c8 prepares that c-pawn to advance. And if then e4, bishop to e6, and if white trades that off and saves his a-pawn, then the c-pawn is very fast indeed, and in a time that white's stuck blockading the pawn, black will just pick up more material and he's winning easily. Going back to the game, Bertok guarded the b-pawn like this, but Fischer's next move, g5, is very strong. White is now practically forced to give up a piece to get rid of black's pawns. If he try knight to h5, then knight to e4 hits the rook. If then rook to c2, queen to b4. Now if allowed, black could simply take on a3 and then the c-pawn will be a passed pawn. And if white trades himself, then a2 is hanging. And after b3, many moves are good enough. One would be knight to c3, attacking the a-pawn again. But now the rook is also attacked. It's just a hopeless position for white. Therefore in the game, white did sacrifice the knight for 2 pawns. Bishop to e6 defends the knight. Now if black can consolidate, then he'll win pretty easily with the extra piece. Unfortunately for white though, the end was already very near, because at this point he missed a tactic. White's best try was to trade on d5. Bertok played instead rook from f to d1, but clearly he'd missed knight takes e3, which simply wins a pawn because black threatens with queen g2 mate. White now took the knight, bishop takes bishop, h4, that creates some luft and it may open up the black king a bit, but Fischer didn't allow white to get any play. Rook to e8 hitting the queen, queen to g3, queen e7, b3 safeguarding the a-pawn, the bishop retreated, then f4, so white's trying hard to get some compensation, but g4 simply closes the g-file, no more threats. The game ended quickly, h5 was played, but after queen check, rook f2 and bishop to f5, Bertok resigned. He's a piece down for just a pawn. This isn't difficult for black to win, especially for Fischer. For example, if white now goes king to h1, stepping out of the pin, then rook to e3 hits the queen. After queen to h4, g3. And after rook from f to f1, black doesn't need to do anything special, just doubling rooks and preparing to land on e1. White can barely move, so why rush anything? One final move for white, let's say a4. Then black's killer move is simply queen to c3. And black will simply land a rook on the back rank, and because of the pawn on g3, it'll be checkmate very soon. Very fine game by Fischer. It's always interesting how the best players always make it look so easy. Out of the opening, Fischer fairly quickly got these hanging pawns, which cramped white's pieces. Then he got this plan with a5 and queen to b4. But when white first made this mistake, and then he missed this tactic, white just collapsed very soon. He never had any compensation for the piece either, and then it's just all too easy for Fischer. So hopefully you liked this kind of rare Queen's Gambit game by Fischer. If you did, you'd make my day if you'd simply like the video. I'd really appreciate it. Also do consider subscribing to the channel. There'll be another great game tomorrow. So I'll be seeing you guys again soon, and take care.